Welcome back to an episode of Message and Call. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about planning, probably around a lighter version of planning. This light version, it's called the Agile Donut Planning. In the Agile Donut Planning, there are two additional plannings that is added onto Scrum, on top of the Scrum planning we have today. So there is the roadmap planning, and then there is the PI planning. And for those of you that are working with multiple teams that usually have some dependencies among those teams, there is one more thing to add to this planning, which is Crossquad Planning. So this is a modification, not changes, but I would say a couple more addition things that you have to do for sprint planning. So let's take a look at each one of those. Let's start with the first one, roadmap planning. Now, roadmap planning is basically where we are looking out 4 quarters worth of work. Okay, so the way we do this is real simple. We want a list first. Gotta make sure you have a backlog. In this backlog, you have what we call big items. Some of you may call it epics, may call it features, however you want to name it. It's just big chunk of work. Now, ideally, this big chunk of work should be divided in a way that it is consumable by each team. The sizing that we're going to look at here is anywhere between that will fit into I would say a sprint to maybe multiple sprints. So the sizing that we use is usually T-shirt sizing in this planning. So we're going to do small, medium, large, or extra large. Now, when you do this the first time, I would say create a guide. This is just a guide for conversation. So a small is anywhere between 1 to 2 sprints, for example. A medium is anywhere between 3 to 5. A large can be from anywhere between 6 to 8, and then so on. So use that as your first basis for guideline for conversation. Now, the way it works is this: once you have your listing of your items, your features, in this instance, you call it features or epics again. Doesn't really matter what you call them, it's this big chunk of work. You need to make sure you order them based on priority and then based on teams. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go into the meeting, we're going to have a conversation. Usually the product owner or program manager will talk about the big chunk of work and says, hey, we're going to go do this. And based on this, there are 5 big chunk of work that we need to do, and here is what they are. Then we take each one of those, then we discuss basically what is needed to be done. So here, we're also making sure it's valuable, usable, and feasible. So therefore, in the meeting, you are going to have product owners going to be in there. Your managers for the team might be in there. Scrum masters, architect, and UI designers will be in this conversation as well. And also, any in terms of infrastructure will probably be in this conversation as well. So we want to make sure everybody's involved in here. These are high-level people. Now, have the conversation, talk about it, just like how you would talk as stories, discuss them, and then do size them. Everybody in this instance size them. So once you size them, we write them down. Now, based on your guide, we're going to take this chunk of work. We're going to say, who does this work should go to? Usually, we can quickly identify which team will it go to. Then take this work, move them to the team, and place them in the quarter that it fits. Now, go through each of those stories, each of those big chunk of stories, and then move them to where they need to. Now, then what you had happening is that now you have line work up by team, and then based on each quarter, you can see where the work will fall. Now, what I like to do is I usually tend to place them where they end, right? Not where they start, but where they end. Because if you're using sticky notes, or if you're using some form of sticky notes, for example, the sizes are all the same. So how do you know if it's small, medium, or large? So once you've done that, once you've gone through that, have that conversation, that's it. You are pretty much done. Now, how long does this last? Usually, I would say the meeting will run anywhere between an hour to 4 hours. For me, for about 6 teams worth of work, we usually take about, I would say, 4 hours, close to 4 hours, right? So we do it in the morning and then go through about lunchtime. Now, how often do I do this? The ones that I have been successful on has been where we started with, we do it quarterly, and then we got to the point where we're doing it on every 2 sprints. The reason we do that was basically the reason why we went from a monthly, not monthly, from a quarterly to 2 sprints was because there was a lot more changes, a lot more dynamic changes to our backlog than we had anticipated. So if you have a much static backlog that doesn't move a lot, then you can probably get away with doing this once a quarter. So once you have it, you're done. That's all there is to this meeting. The outcome or output from this is now that you have a direction in terms of where or what items you want the team to work on, and roughly where you potentially start working on them and potentially finishing on them. So you will take this, and this is where you're going to use this output that you have, this outcome that you have, and you're going to bring it with you onto our next planning session. So next up is our PI planning. So in PI planning, this is where you involve everybody in the team. Now in roadmap, you only involve what we call higher level key people. In this, you want to involve your developers, your teams, okay? This is where the lower level. So PI planning consists of what I consider as 3 parts to this. The first part is just briefings, getting directions, providing some visions and goals and things like that. So this is where your product owner comes up and then share information, right, about what each team will be working on. Now, part 2 is where you, based on the information now that we have from roadmap, we know what items, which feature goes to which team. Now, part 2 is where each team then do a breakout session where they take the work for their team, right, and then they try to do a breakdown of those items. The way we do this is this: let's say if you've been running Scrum before and you're trying to implement PI planning in the middle of this, right? You can run Scrum for a while and then you can introduce this. You don't have to introduce this up front. This can be injected in the middle of it. You just have to figure it out. Assuming that you're doing this in the middle of it, that means you have items in your backlog that you have already sized during backlog refinement. And you have run Scrum for a while. That means you know your team's velocity. So guess what? All you have to do is take the stories that has been sized, since they are already ordered in the backlog, take them and fill it into each of the sprints. So in PI planning, we're looking at 6 sprints, right? So take each of the stories based on the story points, fit them into the sprints from 1 to 6. Now, since usually we do sizing, the ideal number of items that we size in backlog refinement should be about 2 to 3 sprints worth of work that's in the backlog that's already sized. So you can take those items and place them in the first 3 sprints, right? Place them where they are, get a gut check, talk about velocities, talk about capacities in terms of who's available, who's not. Place them where you feel, where the team feels. It's a gut feel, right? Usually if you run 30 points, for example, per sprints, then does it fit all the work in that sprint? Place them all out. Now what you do is that for the items that we haven't discussed, we haven't had a chance to talk or size them at backlog refinement. That means, it's really rough. This is a big chunk of work. So we do have the team take a first look at it, first pass in terms of breaking it down, a rough breakdown, right? Here's maybe, this one feature is going to break down into 4 different parts. Take that small parts and then roughly figure out where you would place them into the next sprints. Just place them where you need to. Again, this is a gut feel. This is a rough estimate. I usually don't ask the team to do story pointing at this point because to me it doesn't make sense. It's a waste of time for me. I just have them do a gut feel, place them where they are. So based on this, then you would then do all 6 sprints, 1 to 6, fill them all out, right? So once you have that, then you are done basically with part 2 of PI planning. So what you do in part 3 of PI planning is that you do what we call a closing. A closing is where we get all the teams to come back, to bring their work back as they planned, as they had forecasted for the 6 sprints, to put them together into our PI board. On this PI board, we get to see dependencies. We're going to talk about dependencies. We get to discuss adjustment and things like that, right, between teams. So once you have that, I usually do bring everybody back in, talk through it, and then we're done. So how long does this last? anywhere between, I would say, 2 hours to 3 or 4 hours. It all depends to you. I could run 6 teams in 2 hours because the first 30 minutes is done on briefing, part one. Part two is 1 hour breakout session for the teams. And then the final part is again 30 minutes to bring everybody back in again. Once you're done with this, is that with the PI's information coming out from a team, we can now compare that to what we guesstimate or forecast at the roadmap level. So you get the chance to update your roadmap as necessary. So here are some additional tips based on my experience running this. So one of the things that we learned was that if your backlog in terms of work coming in is shifting a lot, it moves around a lot in terms of priority, then you want to make sure that there is no gap between roadmap planning and PI planning. So initially what we did was that we had the roadmap planning on a quarterly basis, and then we do roadmap planning every 2 sprints. And then what happened was that because of those in-between gap, there were things that got shifted that we didn't get a chance to discuss. Things was added into the backlog, for example, and then we did not have the chance to size them and place them in the proper location. So we end up moving them to be closed. So I ran them usually on a Monday morning. We do the roadmap planning and then do necessary conversation if we need it throughout the day, usually between the morning of Monday. And then PI planning starts on Tuesday morning. We went through and do that. So again, just make sure those ceremonies, the roadmap planning and PI planning, as long as they do not coincide with your sprint planning, then you're pretty much safe to go. The other thing to keep in mind is that if this is your first time doing this, it is going to be very rough. So don't expect people smiling, don't expect people jumping up with joy and things like that. It is going to be rough. People will have no idea what to do. Again, people want to feel uncomfortable because it is a gut feel. Some of this is just gut feel and rough estimates. It's okay. You just have to do it a couple of times, and once you've done it a couple of times, you will get a hang of it. The third thing that you can get from the combination of roadmap planning and PI planning and Scrum is that, remember, at roadmap planning, we size them using t-shirt sizing, right? We say, here's our guides. Small is 1 to 2, and then medium is 3 to 5, right? And then we have the team breakdown, right? Now, the stories that you've broken down, I would link them back to the big rock, the features, link them, right? So you may have 5 or 10 stories per one of those features, for example. And then when you go and story size them, keep the story sizing, keep the size of the stories. And what you want to do is collect information, right? For this feature that is medium, what is my total points that we achieve? Okay, so using that information, right, knowing the total number of story points per feature based on size, medium, right? Then based on the velocity of the team. Now every team will have a velocity. Remember, we say break it down by team. So this is going to help us here. So since we know the velocity of the story that the team can consume per sprints, we now can easily say, on average, my medium size work is going to be between, 1 or 2 sprints. Now remember, we have a guide. Now we got actual data coming back up to say, are we good at what we do? How close did we get? Now, based on your data, let's say, assuming you have collected 10 different features that is of the size medium. Now you can say, take the data, on average, medium is about maybe 2 sprints. So with that information now, you can take that back and then revise your guide that we use in roadmap. See where we're getting at? We're getting better at how we do forecasting and estimation at the higher level. So now you can revise your roadmap sizing and use the new guide to do. So this allows us to get better at what we do. The last thing in here is that what's interesting is the gut feel or the rough estimates that we do in PI planning is actually more accurate than traditional forecasting or planning that we've done. In the past, as a project manager, I would actually try to plan the project out, and I'm the one doing planning and not the team members. What I found that this is actually much more accurate. So we're able to meet expectation much better this way. The other part of it is remember that in PI planning, there are stuff in there that we ask the team to break out. Well, those things that broken out is actually something that can help the product owner, a direction for a product owner on what to work on first, on what stories to refine first. So those are a couple of things that we learned. This is the last thing that you want to do if you have multiple teams. So when we're dealing with multiple teams, there needs to be a way for us to communicate progress and dependencies on each other. So the way we do that is what we call a cross-squad planning. So this is optional. If you have multiple teams, if you have dependencies, you want to do this. So bring your team together after sprint planning, right? Each individual team will do their own sprint planning. They will then come together into what we call a cross-squad planning, where you have representatives from each team to come up and basically talk about what the team has committed to do in the coming sprint. Now, this is ways we allow for dependencies issues to come up. Now, then we can then coordinate among each team. So there you have it, real simple. Cross-squad planning doesn't take long, usually lasts about 30 minutes. I would say 5 minutes per team. And if you have 6 teams, that's 30 minutes right there. So do it quick. This is a great time to get together and resolve any issues. And there you have it. That is Agile donut planning in I would say, a nutshell maybe. So hopefully this helps you out. If you have any more questions or things like that, feel free to send them my way. Bye.